Good morning, everybody. So I've got one of these 96 to 2000 Caravans that has had the typical instrument cluster problem with the bouncing gauges. Sometimes the temp and the fuel gauge would just go up to midway position and stay there. Then while I'm driving, these lights down here, the transmission lights would flicker on and off. It's random whateverness, and the speedometer would bounce around and pin, and it was a mess. So of course you head to YouTube to try to troubleshoot this, and it's a great place, no doubt about it. There's quite a number of videos on YouTube, to get you to this point where you've got to literally remove all this section of dash, pop the cluster out of there. I've always found that the trick is to lean the cluster towards the driver's seat and angle it slightly, just enough to get your arm into this little corner here. And then I position the tab over the indentation in the steel, which allows me to get my finger down there to pull it up, and it pops right out. Literally, it takes 15 seconds to pop that cluster out. Okay, so let's get her on the bench and I'll tell you what I discovered on my unit. So here we are on the bench with my unit, and there's, again, a lot of videos on YouTube telling you how to get to this point, and you're going to want to check the connections, the soldering connections for these pinouts here for the connector, which are right here. And I guess the common culprit is this one on the end, which just happens to be the grounding pin. And so I did the resolder on all these, just freshened everything up, made sure all the connections were good. No good for me. Didn't solve the solution. I had to troubleshoot and dive in a little deeper to find out what was going on. Okay, so obviously you're going to want to check the circuit board over, make sure there's nothing burned or fried. Or in my particular situation, it happened to be the C5 capacitor up here. I'll see if I can get in there. It's labeled C5 right there. And most times with capacitors, you can tell that they've gone south. My fault, the failure on that capacitor, was actually underneath. And let me show you. It was underneath on the bottom side where it attached to the circuit board. So it really wasn't visible. I mean, you had to get in there, really take your time. Like this capacitor, you can't even bend over to the side to check it out. So I actually removed that, inspected it, and reinstalled it. It was good. But for my particular situation, the culprit on the dash was the C5 capacitor. It had failed on the bottom side. And just to confirm that, so the C5 capacitor is up here on the circuit board. But I know that that end pin is a ground pin, and if you follow this this is a grounding circuit here. Where does it lead? It leads right up to the cap. And that was the confirmation for me that the cap was bad. So I got the 68 farad 16 volt capacitor, slapped it in, solved the problem. Okie doke, so I've got the instrument cluster reinstalled there, and here's what I got going on. Working like a champ. Gas gauge is working. Everything's functioning. Reverse. Everything. I mean, all these lights were actually working before. Sometimes the cluster would just pop on and operate normally driving down the road. Kind of a random thing, but just double check your capacitors. I'm a huge believer that cause a lot of problems for a lot of things, and I've had pretty much a lot of success tracking down bad caps, and that seems to be the root of all evil for a lot of situations. So I hope this helps somebody out, And I am certainly glad that this headache has finally come to an end. Over and out.